Hi, I'm Dave Thomas Rocker. This is my next video about spirituality. Um, and today I'm going to talk about one aspect of the spirituality of the movie Forrest Gump. I'm pretty sure a lot of you've seen this movie. I think it was Best Picture of 1994. Wonderful movie, I think. And also a very spiritual movie in many ways. Tonight, however, I'm just going to discuss one aspect of the spirituality of the movie, which I actually disagree with. And it's the aspect, I don't know if you remember the feather that at the very beginning of the movie, this feather falls through the sky and lands on him and almost lands on a bunch of other people as it's falling. But it lands, I think, in his lap or maybe his cover of Curious George. I'm not sure. It ends up in his cover of inside his copy of Curious George, which he gives his son at the end of the movie. Beautiful scene, but I want to tell you why I disagree with what they showed, and it has to do with chaos theory, in particular, something called the butterfly effect. I don't know how many have heard of this, but chaos is a pretty new mathematical or scientific theory, and it's kind of a departure from some earlier views of physics, in particular Newtonian mechanics, and the idea that everything is predictable. There's something called the Laplace machine, and in classical mechanics, it says if you know the positions and the velocities of every atom and molecule in a system, then at least in principle, you should be able to calculate everything that's going to happen in the future. And this is an example of what's called determinism or predestination. A lot of people believe this. A lot of people believe that, fate or predestination determines everything that's going to happen in the future. I don't believe that. The opposite of predestination or determinism is what's called free will. And I do believe in free will. But aside from that, I'll put that aside from now. I want to talk a little bit more about chaos theory. So how does that affect the idea of determinism? Well, I'll tell you. So the idea of chaos effect. Sometimes this thing, you see this diagram here, it looks a little like a butterfly. As a matter of fact, what this diagram is illustrating is something that's called the butterfly effect, and not just because this picture looks like a butterfly, but what you're supposed to imagine is a butterfly flapping its wings. So there's a saying about this: a butterfly flapping its wings can produce a hurricane. Maybe a month later, because of the way it affects the air that it's flapping its wings against. If the butterfly wasn't there, then the hurricane wouldn't happen, or something like that, or maybe it could prevent a hurricane. Well, it's the same idea. Basically, the idea of chaos theory is that if you change the initial conditions just a tiny amount, then what happens is that change gets magnified with time. So things become more and more different than they would have been if that thing hadn't happened. And you see a lot of sci-fi about this. You see stories about time travel where there's a good scene in Back to the Future that's kind of like that. If you remember, Michael J. Fox or Marty in the movie, he affects the future by running into his parents to the point where, if he hadn't into them, he would have been born, but because he ran into them and the mom fell in love with him instead of his father, he jeopardized their marriage and he jeopardized his own existence. It's kind of the same idea. And as far as like the feather, what that means is that there's really no way to predict what the feather is going to do. I mean, what you're supposed to believe. At least that's what I think the story makers or the movie makers wanted to convince us, was that somehow this feather was predestined to end up in Forrest Gump's copy of Curious George, and I just don't think that's possible. I don't think even God knew or knows where the feather would end up, because every little tiny whiff of air is just kind of perturbing in an unpredictable ways, and there's just no way we can know where it's going to land. So that's just one aspect of the movie I don't agree with, but I do really love the movie, and I'm going to talk some more about the spirituality of Forrest Gump, at least aspects that I do agree with in future videos. But that's all I have to say for this one. So thank you for watching.